Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Climate Change Media Hub at the Asian College of Journalism, I extend a warm welcome to all the participants and the speakers for today's session. This initiative is supported by Interlink Academy, Germany. Today's conversation will be around the topic of carbon capture, utilization, and storage, and examines whether it's a promise or an illusion. We will have Mr. Baruruchi Mishra in conversation with Mr. Ramesh M., who will be discussing this topic. A quick introduction about both our speakers. Mr. Baruruchi Mishra is a partner and group CEO of Net Enterprise Group of Companies. He also serves as an adjunct faculty at the IIT ISM Dhanbad's Petroleum Engineering Department. He has previously worked with Shell, Enron, BG Group, ONGC, and Kane Energy. Moderating the session will be Mr. Ramesh M., a consulting editor with the Hindu Business Line. He has covered a range of subjects, notably renewable energy, climate change, and the business of science. He currently anchors the special pages on clean tech and quantum at the newspaper. The session will be for 45 minutes, followed by a 15-minute question and answer session. I request all the participants except the speakers to mute your mic during the session. You can post your questions and comments in the chat or indicate using the hand symbol when we open for Q&A. I will now hand it over to Mr. Ramesh.
Thank you, Anjana. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Mishra ji, my old friend.
Good morning.
Well, the reason we have chosen this topic is something that is quite obvious to all of you here. The budget had a lot to give, even if not a lot to say about carbon capture, but it has a lot to give. The finance minister has mentioned an outlay of 20,000 crores for carbon capture, utilization, and storage projects in India. Of course, this 20,000 crores is to be spent over the next 5 years. Even then, it is still quite a lot of money. So this CCUS is not an entirely new technology. We've been talked about it for years, but it is taking center stage, obviously, in India and elsewhere in the world. So this gives us this excellent context to go ahead and dilate on this topic. Now, Mr. Mishra is an expert in this subject, and he will talk more about this. But essentially, as we understand, carbon capture is just taking out the carbon dioxide emissions from, let's say, power plants or whatever the source is, and putting them back in some manner, maybe underground storage or somewhere else, maybe in the form of gas hydrates, in the form of methane hydrates, sequestering, putting it away permanently for maybe, thousands of years or millions of years, completely neutralizing it. Broadly, that is the idea. Take carbon dioxide from the emission source. Of course, it's not as simple as that. You will have to separate the carbon dioxide and so on. And then you put it somewhere, you store it somewhere in such a manner that it doesn't come out in the atmosphere. And it remains there for a very, very, very long time. That is broadly the concept of carbon capture and storage. There are different technologies for doing this. Elsewhere in the world, many things are happening. And on this, I can do no better than to read a brief paragraph, a few lines from a recent report of the International Energy, it is IEA, which says that in the world, of course, this is a little dated, a couple of years back. It says about there are 45 commercial CCUS facilities already in operation, and there are about 700 projects announced. So all these projects will, by 2030, if these projects do come up, by 2030, they will be in a position to, they will be able to neutralize or take away 435 million tons of carbon dioxide by 2030. So a number of projects are going on, but IEA also makes the point that the announced projects are still not enough for us to for the world to go and meet its net zero emissions by 2050. This is broadly the background. So that is why, to discuss this, we have invited Mr. Mishra, who runs a company called Navata Energy Transition. Mr. Mishra, as was just introduced, comes with a background in the oil and gas industry, Where does it tie up with CCUS is in oil and gas industry also there is something called enhanced oil recovery where you inject water, inject gas into the well so that the oil or gas that is in the well is pushed out through another pipeline. So you take something and put it into the ground, pump it into the ground is something broadly a concept that is common for both the oil industry and the CCUS. Navata Energy Transition has been doing a lot of work on this. A number of large companies have been consulting Navata Energy. So again, I should let Mr. Mishra introduce himself and introduce his company for starters, and then we'll carry on the discussion. So, Mr. Mishraji, tell me a little bit about yourself briefly, maybe in a line or two, and then tell me what exactly Navata Energy Transition, what does it do? Go ahead, please.
So thank you. My name starts with a B, but it's a misnomer. Actually, it is Varruchi. Because of the Bengali dialectical influence, it starts with a B because there is no V in the Bengali language. I'm not a Bengali. So my name is Varruchi Mishra. Thank you for this opportunity.
Varruchi Mishra.
Yeah, thank you. And I've been in the oil and gas sector for the last 35 years, worked with various companies, ONGC, Enron, as Preeti said, BG Group, British Gas, and Shell. My last job was with Shell as the Vice President for Engineering in the East and responsibility for building the Shell Technology Center in Bangalore. And also was the Project Director for Growth and Transition Projects for Shell in India, expanding Shell's footprint in the energy transition space. So very familiar with the topic because I have, as the head of project performance assurance for P&T in Shell, I had the responsibility to deeply evaluate the CCS projects, challenge the projects on their scope, on their cost, and how to get them to a situation there where they could be economic. I mean, of course, there is this element of subsidies or incentives which are necessary to make these projects economic, but on its own, how the projects could not leave a dollar on the table. So that was my job in Shell as the head of the project performance assurance for P&T, competitiveness reviews, competitive scoping, etc. So that's my background. And Net Enterprise, I joined in 2023 as the partner and group CEO. And we are in
Net Enterprise is Navata Energy Transition, right?
Yeah, so Navata Energy Transition, right, sir.
So we should be consistent in the name. So maybe we should mention this as Net Enterprise only in future.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically, we are into engineering and project delivery, engineering across the phase from pre-FEED, FEED to detail engineering to, post-execution, also support operations. And in all sectors, oil and gas, petrochemicals, refining, and energy transition. Because we are talking about CCS today, we are trying to work with a lot of companies to try and see how we can advise them on CCS. We are bidding very actively for CCS projects. We have a partnership with a UK company called Trax International, which are deep domain experts in injection wells and subsurface modeling for CCS, etc. So we bring the surface elements and Trax brings the subsurface elements, and EP Consult is another company in the UK which does some special studies. So we three work together to advise project developers on the opportunities of optimizing the CCS and de-risking the CCS projects. So let me stop there. So that's a brief about me, and the company.
Fine. So before we move to other subtopics in this, all of us would be, as journalists, we are headline hunters. We would be very interested in knowing from you what are the projects that are going on in India, or at least have been announced, probably not in operation yet. Which are the projects? Who is looking at it very keenly? Which are the projects that are likely to come up? What is the scale and so on? Because I remember in an earlier conversation I had with you, I think you mentioned HPCL was interested or something like that. So you can tell us whatever you can about this.
Yeah. So look, if you look at the entire value chain of CCS projects, then there is not much happening in India, and I'll tell you at what stage they are in. Carbon capture as a technology, there have been many trials and many capture for use cases which is happening. So when you use CO2 for pharma, for fertilizer, for beverages, etc., there's a lot of lot of refineries and other petrochemical plants, etc., which captured the CO2. Now, those are not at scale of CCS. So CCS involves a few segments or components. So the first one starts with carbon capture. The second is purification of the stream, because you would capture carbon from flue gases, or you could capture carbon from a gas stream or syngas, etc., which would be typically pre-combustion, or from flue gas.
1 second, sorry to interrupt you. Flue gases are the gases that come out of the chimneys of thermal power plants, right?
Not only thermal power plants. So when you make any flue gas, any vent. So for example, not only cement kiln, for example. So when in the calcination process of cement, when the carbon carbonate is heated, it comes out, it makes clinker of CaO, calcium oxide, and CO2. And that is the largest source of CO2. And that is a scope 1 CO2, meaning it comes as a part of the process. So you cannot do anything with it other than the two aspects. You leave it into the atmosphere, or you capture it and put it in the ground, or make some use cases, capture it and make methanol out of it, or liquefy it and send it for beverages, or in the pharma industry, or for fertilizers, etc. So there could be some use cases, but realize this: globally, you do all the use cases that is possible, you will still not be able to handle more than 10% of the CO2 that is being emitted, 10 to 15%. You will still have to do something with the 85%, which will remain otherwise into the atmosphere. And I'll come to that a little bit. So the stream, therefore, so you have the capture, and you have the purification, so that you have a neat stream. And then you have to transport it to a location. Now, that transportation could be by pipeline, or it could be by ships. So you have a project called Northern Lights in Norway, where you have two CO2 ships, which carry liquid CO2 from across Europe to Norway, where it is stored in a tank, and then it is pumped by 100 kilometers of pipeline to an offshore platform called Osberg A platform. And from there, after some more dehydration, etc., removing water content, etc., it is pumped into an injection well, and then it goes into the formation, or the reservoir is called the Johansson Reservoir formation. So that is the transportation, either by ship or by pipeline. Normally, if you have more than 500 kilometers, then it is better to ship it. And we'll talk about the cost of each of these segments. And then there is compression. You compress the CO2 so that you can inject it into the well. So there is an injection well.
Where does sorry to interrupt you again. At which point does this compression happen? At the source or at the injection point?
Both points.
Both points, okay.
Yeah, why? Because to be able to overcome the pressure drop in the pipeline, you have to pump it through, yeah? You have to compress, and you have to push it into the pipeline. So at that point, you will have to compress the CO2. And normally, transportation is good in the dense phase, where in the dense phase, so dense phase is critical, above the critical point of CO2. What it means is above 70 bars. And 30 degrees, I think, is the -30 is the temperature. What happens then is it retains the viscosity of gas, but the density of liquid. Therefore, you can compress more CO2. I mean, more CO2 can go in the same diameter of the pipeline. So that's the compression that happens at the location where you're capturing the CO2 at the source. And then finally at the injection, so there's a compression hub. So for example, in Porthos, which is the project being done in Rotterdam, CO2 is captured by petrochemical plants of Pernis and some other petrochemical plants. They capture the CO2, they put it in a network of pipelines, which takes it to the port of Rotterdam. There they have a compression hub, which essentially means that a few compressors are there. which increases the pressure from whatever is the landing pressure of the CO2, and then pushes it 22 kilometers through a pipeline into the offshore platform in the Taka field where it is injected. So those are the phases, injection, and then finally it gets into the reservoir where the plume of CO2 moves, and we'll talk about how the plume of CO2, what is important from a reservoir perspective, so that it stays there. So those are the components of the carbon, the entire value chain. Now, in India, while carbon capture is happening for various at various locations, one of the big things that we as a company are doing is a CCS, a carbon capture project from an HPCL refinery in Vizag, where we capture 100 tons of flue gas from a hydrogen manufacturing unit in the refinery and make 60 tons of CO2 out of it, clean 60 tons of CO2 out of it. And then the process is a very unique process because it relies on process intensification by use of rotating packed bed reactors. What it means is...
Sorry, could you say that again? Rotating?
Packed bed reactors. What
Okay.
it means is in a typical column, the gas rises and the solvent comes down, and then there is an interaction and the solvent pulls the CO2 out, absorbs the CO2, and then you heat the solvent later on to generate the CO2. So evolve the CO2 and capture that CO2. In this case, it uses centrifugal action to increase the contacting efficiency of the solvent and the gas. And therefore, the size of the reactor comes down by a factor of 10. And this is one of the areas where one can reduce cost. This is a patented technology of HPCL. And we as the EPC are done all the engineering, all the procurement and supporting HPCL and at the location with a team, and will be involved in commissioning and startup. So there are many...
Mr. Reddy, sorry, I mean, it is such a fascinating area. I have to keep interrupting you.
Yeah,
please don't mind it.
No,
Now, this put the 60 tons of capture in perspective. Is it small scale, medium scale, pilot scale, large scale? What is it?
So
what is 60 tons?
60 tons itself is, if you just did a simple math, 60 tons per day, 60 tons per day is 60 times 330.
No, would you call it a pilot scale, or would you call it a commercial scale, a large, small,
So the
what?
capture itself is a commercial scale. The capture itself is a commercial scale.
It's a commercial scale plant then.
But liquefaction, the liquefaction is only 10 tons because that is the use that they have. Other is put back into the atmosphere to prove of the technology. So this is, and the commercial scales can go to 100,000 tons per day, 2,000 tons per day, 5,000 tons per day. But this is at the brink of being commercial. You can build a 0.5 MTPA facility with this.
Okay.
So CCS project with this. So these are the areas and the components of the carbon capture. So in India,
is this HPCL project in operation? What stage?
Yeah, so it's mechanically complete now, going to be mechanically complete, and then in the next few months we will work with HPCL to commission it. But all the equipment have been positioned. The last CO2 compression is being set up. So that's the stage of the project.
That's HPCL. Who else is interested in India?
So that's what I'm saying.
HPCL is interested. Other refineries should also be doing it.
Yeah. So let me come back to it. So therefore,
yeah.
So that they are to prove up their patented technology. So that's one of the drivers why they're doing it. It is the capture bit only. In India, the entire value chain of CCS, a few companies are doing something. So Oil India came out with the first bid for a feasibility report to capture CO2 in their gas stream in Jaisalmer and inject it into the formation after a few kilometers of transportation. But that is in the feasibility stage. ONGC has also just come out a few weeks ago with an expression of interest for a feasibility of capturing CO2 in the Gujarat area Koyali or in Hazira, actually, from the Hazira petrochemical plant to capture and then to transport and inject it in their Gandhar field. Gandhar is one of their gas condensate fields. So that's
Gandhara.
one of the EOI that ONGC is doing now.
So
NTPC,
that's just very interesting. So CO2 can also be used. Actually, one of the use cases is EOR, right?
right, I'll come to that. I'm just
Yeah.
telling you a brief of who's doing what in CCS in India.
Yeah, yeah.
So those are the two large companies. NTPC has drilled a well in the coal seam in Jharkhand, and I'll have to tell you the name of that coal field to test the injectivity and storage potential of CO2 in the coal seam. So that well is 1,000 meters well and recently completed. So those are the three key things that I see in this. And then there have been a lot of discussions, a lot of MOUs signed. So Shell had signed an MOU with ONGC to prove up the pore spaces of the saline aquifers and the depleted oil and gas fields where CO2 can be stored. So that study has been completed. And there are others. So ONGC has also signed MOUs with Equinor. Oil India has signed some MOUs, etc., in various phases. They are in various phases. So that, in effect, therefore, not a lot other than some initial feasibility or a one injection well is being done in India at this stage. But this 2,000 crores, 20,000 crores allocation will give a fillip to this because a lot can be done and will need to be done in India. So let me take a step back and tell you, and there have been many naysayers, CCS will be this, CCS will be that, it is a hype and those kind of things. Let me tell you a very simple thing. CCS is not in competition with renewables.
Okay.
The more the renewables, the better. The end goal of renewables has to be the fossil fuels should be zero. And that is fine. But CO2 emissions are not from fossil fuels alone. So you have cement. 50% of the CO2 which is emitted in cement is process. Meaning it is scope 1. It is a matter of the process. The moment you start making cement, you have to emit that CO2. Coal gasification is and I'll talk about that a little bit. CO2 has to come out, and it's a very pure and stream of CO2. The capture cost of coal gasification CO2 could be less than $15 per ton, and therefore it is a great anchor for India to realize its resource reality. So we have a lot of coal, yeah, and if this could be gasified, you could make syngas, which would then can be methanol or any other product, but also hydrogen. 20 million tons of hydrogen in China is being made out of coal gas from the syngas, which is a matter which comes from coal gas.
So just to clarify to people here, syngas is one intermediate step to make hydrogen.
Yeah,
right?
Syngas is CO
It's carbon monoxide plus hydrogen.
Plus hydrogen. That's right. That's right. Sorry for not explaining that. So what therefore happens in India, look at the opportunity. You have so much of coal, yeah? Albeit that the coal in India has high ash content, it's poor washability, and the calorific value is so. But these are technical issues. There are technologies which can deal with it. And the CO2 stream which comes out of it can be captured at a much lower cost. And therefore, it can become an anchor for a CO2 infrastructure in India, the pipeline. And it could be then taken to, let's say, Netra is proving up, the NTPC company is proving up CO2 injection in coal seams. We could lay a pipeline all in the west eastern flank all the way up to the coal fields, and CO2 from coal gasification is captured and put in there. You're suddenly making green hydrogen in millions of tons. And you are also creating infrastructure for steel mills, for petrochemicals, for refineries, or power plants, which are in that catchment area to put their CO2 in this pipeline and put it into the coal seams. So that's a case that we should really push. It's a typical hub case. In the western coast and in the eastern coast, there has to be these kind of hubs. Realize this. In USA, there are 8,500 to 9,000 kilometers of CO2 pipeline. And people capture, clean their CO2 and put it in that pipeline. And there are use cases, and I'll come to the use cases before that. But the government, even Trump is supporting it. So 45Q is the regulation under which they get subsidies. In fact, Trump administration has increased or has made it more universal, the 45Q, and it is helped $80 to $85 per ton, or $70 to $85 per ton is the incentive, tax incentives they are getting for capturing the CO2 and putting it in the ground. So Trump has also not pulled it back. He has pulled back wind and other stuff, but not this, which is a very, very important thing. Why? Because, of course, they want fossil fuels to continue. And there is a huge environmental thing which is happening. So there is a realization, therefore, that it is there. Artificial intelligence needs data centers.
Yes.
55 gigawatts of data center is required in the United States. 30% of, and so the power supply to a data center cannot be fluctuating. You can't shut down and start because you have entire language learning modules and everything going on that. So you need very, very confirmed, uninterrupted power. So one of the things that they're looking at is behind the meter power generation. So 30% of this gigawatt, 55 gigawatts, roughly 15 to 20 gigawatts of power has to come from natural gas turbines, generators, turbines driving the generators. Now, there are two aspects to it. If you just did turbine and this natural gas fired power plants behind the meters, you will be putting a lot of CO2 in the atmosphere. But if you take the 45Q subsidies that the government is, tax holidays that the government is giving there, then the cost of this power becomes $45 to $48 per megawatt hour. If you just did natural gas combined cycle, it would give you at $65 to $70 per megawatt hour. But with CCS, it is of course, because of the subsidies, you're getting $45 to $48 per megawatt hour. So this suddenly has become a huge use case for CO2 CCS in the US, and do whatever. So intermittency of electric and power and the grid limitations, yeah? So 55 gigawatts, imagine the amount of work that you have to do in stabilizing the grid if some load drops off and then comes back up, those kind of things. Therefore, AI has suddenly become a very big use case for CCS, natural gas combined cycle plus CCS. India is talking about 10 gigawatts or 8 gigawatts of artificial intelligence energy requirement. They are coming up with this AI hubs or data centers, as you know, all over. And the last I read was the total was around 6 or 8 gigawatt power requirements for AIs. Now, again, intermittency becomes an issue with solar and wind. You could have other aspects stored. You have geothermal, and geothermal is $85 per megawatt, by the way, just. So all kinds of power sources would be needed, and natural gas or even coal-fired power plants with CCS would become the in thing there. So that's a big use case.
So a coal-fired power plant with CCS will qualify for the green label, right?
So coal power plants, again, it is because the flue gases, there's a lot of ash, and the flue gases are a lot, the amount of CO2 is contaminated with a lot of other nasties, as you call in a coal power plant. So the cost of capture in a coal-fired power plant ranges from around $45 to $55 per ton. That is high. Yeah. So without subsidies, etc., it cannot fly. But the fact remains that there are proven technologies. Carbon capture, CCS has been happening globally for the last 30 years. Sleipner field in Norway, in the North Sea, has been capturing CO2 and injecting since 1996 in Salina Kypros. So this is not a new technology. Power plants are a challenge, and that is well understood because the partial pressure of CO2 is very low in the flue gases, so the cost of capture is high. The rest of the costs are all the same. So if you could figure out a way in which the cost of capture in the power plants is reduced, then this becomes very viable. But look at the alternative. You can gasify the coal, and you can make hydrogen and let hydrogen and then or syngas or methanol, and these fuels can be used to, or even synthetics methane, and these could be used for firing your power plants. So there is a pathway there, or be it that some of it will have to be proven, but on a lab scale.
You're saying via coal gasification?
Via coal gasification. Via coal gasification. And this is suddenly a very big thing globally, because our resource reality is we have a lot of coal, yeah? And we have to, and India is an and solution. We can't wish away coal. And we have to do so. As much as we can gasify and use it as an energy source with CCS, you are in a great place. So that is only, so CCS is not in competition with renewables. Get as much as you can, but the Scope 1 emissions, meaning which come out as a part of the process, in which I said petrochemicals, in which natural gas streams, which have 20-30% CO2 in it in some instances. In Thailand, in the Bongkot and Artit field, you could have as much as 70% CO2. They're not wishing away that, or they're shutting that gas field down, because that is the energy source for there. So they have to do something with that CO2. So high CO2, natural gas. So all these primary or Scope 1 sources of CO2 you have to deal with. So IEA has said that, look, the pathway, or it's not a forecast, it's just a modeling. They're saying, look, it doesn't have 8% anymore. CCS will not be needed for 8%. It will be needed for 4.9%. Now, out of a $40 billion of CO2, 40 billion tons of CO2 emission, or 38 billion tons of CO2 emission, does 8% or 5% matter? You're still talking about 2 billion tons per year. Yeah. And that is still very huge.
Yeah.
So that realization has to be there. And I read this paper by IEEE, which is Institute of Energy Economics.
IEEFA.
And they have grossly generalized. They are saying the cost of this Gorgon went high. So look, LNG project of Gorgon was at $35 billion. That was the FID. The outturn cost on that project was $62 billion. Shell's Prelude was $5 billion. The outturn cost was $8 or $9 or $10 billion. So there have been train wrecks on projects. And when you are talking about CCS, this is a learning curve. So one of the biggest things that IEEFA does not realize that 50 to or 60 to 70% of large projects globally have been train wrecks, more than 25% cost increase and more than 30, 40, 50% schedule increases. In India, or you look at the project. So that is no justification to say that CCS has failed, because Shell has been doing CCS in Quested for the last so many years. And there are the Sleipner, as I said. Porthos is going to be commissioned now, and in Rotterdam. Gorgon itself has started working very well. There were some glitches, some hydrate formations, etc. But that has started working very well. So I don't think it is a hype. And why? One sensitization that the people on the call should understand. So IEA itself says, and there are other modelings also, IPCC also says, for a 50% chance or probability of keeping the temperature rise from pre-industrial levels to 1.5 degrees centigrade, you have the remaining carbon budget of only 130 billion tons. meaning from base year of 2025, you have 130 billion tons remaining. If that much amount goes into the CO2, into the atmosphere, then do whatever, you will not be able to keep the temperature rise below 1.5 degrees. That is the 50% probability.
Anyway, I might just add as an aside that 1.5 degrees is kind of lost case.
Lost case. At 80% probability, it is already lost. It is, and 2025, 2024, they have been years with more than 1.5 degrees centigrade. Now, the way the IPCC judges whether it is a permanent increase above the pre-industrial levels is it has to be for at least 10 to 15 years. But for the last two consecutive years, it has been more than 1.5. Now, for a less than 2 degrees centigrade increase, your carbon budget is roughly 1100 billion tons. So that gives you roughly at 40 billion tons, that gives you around 25 years or so. Yeah, up till 2050 or 20, whatever is that number. So there is no way in which you can substitute renewables for CO2 emissions. You have to pull it out because all these industrial sources of CO2 will continue to belch CO2 into the atmosphere. So unless you have a mechanism to capture it and put it in the ground or do something, use case also, as I said, but use case cannot be more than 10 to 15%. It is very difficult to do to limit our temperature rise. Now on the use case, EOR that you were saying, so in the US, there's a EOR institute which assesses how much CO2 is being used for EOR.
For the benefit of our other listeners here, briefly explain what EOR is.
Okay. So
because
EOR
it's a technical issue related only to the oil industry. It may not be known by everybody.
Yeah, sure. So what happens is when you have a new oil field or a gas field, the pressures in the oil and gas reservoirs are very high. So by its own pressure, by depletion, it comes up to the surface. Yeah. So it's a very high. So initially the pressures are high, but as you produce the oil and gas field over a period of time, the pressure starts coming down. Why? Because the gas which is in the solution, as you reduce the pressure, starts evolving. And when it starts evolving, it pushes the oil and water and the gas itself to the surface. So over a period of time, the pressure comes down. So that is a depletion drive reservoir. And if you have an aquifer drive, the water pushes the oil and gas out. So, but over a period of time, the pressure comes down. And therefore, there will come a time whether if you don't push the oil and gas out, it will stay in the ground. But before that time is reached, what you do is from one side, you inject any stream. It could be a water stream, so that is water injection. In China and many locations, water injection has to start from day one so that the pressure is maintained. From the day you start producing, you start water injection. And then you have CO2 injection. So CO2 can push and go in the formation. It can sweep the oil and gas towards a producing well. So there are two wells. One is a producing well, one is an injection well. So it's a U-looping. You inject CO2 through one of the wells.
And both these wells connect to the same reservoir below.
Same reservoir, yeah. So
yeah, that's important.
So one side pushes or sweeps the hydrocarbons towards the producing wells. Now, there are many considerations there. So just to give you some numbers, so in the US, this enhanced oil recovery using CO2, and that's why this 9,000 kilometers of pipeline is there where many people use this CO2 for enhanced oil recovery. Every day, 1 billion cubic feet of CO2 is injected into the reservoir to push the CO2, the hydrocarbons for EOR, and they produce an incremental 300,000 barrels of oil every day, or 275,000 barrels of oil every day. So CO2 pushes out hydrocarbons and you get an incremental production. If you didn't have, you would lose that 275,000 barrels of CO2 every day. Now, incidentally, that is the total production of ONGC. That 275, 300,000 barrels, give or take 50,000 barrels or whatever, some offshore.
So, Mr. Ji, here is a clear-cut use case for CO2, right? Carbon
Right,
capture.
absolutely.
So why are you so conservative in saying use case can only take away only 10 to 15%? I mean, you can use it for EOR everywhere.
No, but 1 BCF is still, you are everywhere, but still in India, the use case, it is reservoir dependent. So Gandhar, for example, or let me not talk about Gandhar because that could be a very specific thing, but if the reservoir has already been depleted a lot, बहुत ज़्यादा production pressure काफी down हो गया, if the pressure has come down a lot in the reservoir already, then when you inject CO2, there is a huge pressure differential. Yeah. So the dense phase might become a lean phase and it can pocket through and can move very fast. So it may not have the ability to push all the oil into the production well. But there could be, so that is one of the things. But even 1 BCF per day will not be more than 10 to 15% of the total CO2 required to be captured. Now, EOR itself, is it a climate action, or it is a fossil fuel increasing mechanism, production mechanism? So California does not give you subsidies for EOR. They say that by EOR, you increase fossil fuel production, and we are against fossil fuel production. But in other parts, the subsidy, the 45Q still applies, or be it at a lower level, $40 to $60 per ton instead of $80 per ton for pure sequestration. But in the EOR itself, there could be mechanisms where you can both push and sequester. So if you design your EOR in a manner where part of it is pushed and comes out with the oil, and the other part stays in the ground, that itself is meeting your storage, also meeting your storage requirements. So there are many ways in which this can be dealt with. And yes, this is a great use case for India, but then we have to figure out which fields and how much can be the use case in India.
Mr. do we have an idea yet? What is the CO2 absorption capacity of EOR in India? How much can it take now? Is there some estimate already?
So that estimate is not there. Just for a storage capacity perspective, and these are desktop studies, says that India have storage in saline aquifers and depleted oil and gas fields up to 400 billion to 600 billion tons. But these are theoretical figures. If you reduce them by 90% because of technical issues and social issues, because the trapping may not be proper, and I'll come to what are the mechanisms for the CO2 storage, it could come down by 90 to 95%. Even that 30 to 40 gigatons is a lot to deal with our net zero aspirations. We need to sequester 0.3 to 0.4 gigatons every year. And if you're talking about 30, 40 gigatons available, you're talking about 60 years. And after that, you will be net zero anyways. And so you will have found technology progresses. So subsidiary cementing mechanisms, etc. Materials are there where fly ash or slag can be used for cement, but they have not proven to be of value at large scale so far. Who knows, technology moves, something happens, or we get to a situation where the amount of emission into the atmosphere is equivalent to the amount which is captured. So you are in a net zero situation. So quite a few things. So we don't have to bother about the storage spaces. It is just have to prove up these storage spaces so that we can get to a project level storage. Around this, I can build a CCS plant or CCS.
Well, we'll come to storage in a moment, but let us talk about utilization first, then we'll move to storage.
So utilization in India.
As far as utilization is concerned, EOR is one use case mentioned. Whether that is climate action or not is debatable. It's probably not. That's one part. What about hydrogen itself? Hydrogen, which By hydrogen, you mean hydrogen going into methanol, right? That's true.
Yeah. So
How much potential, how much of CO2 can be used up for producing hydrogen and methanol?
So there is so I'll have to give you the data how much methanol can be utilized. So methanol has been used for fuel, although the energy density is not high as much as hydrocarbons. So some estimation have been there, but the way it is CO2 is captured. Hydrogen is also made from electrolysis. And then you can make syngas, and from syngas, methanol is a very straightforward pathway. Or any other source of syngas, you can make ethanol in a very straightforward pathway. But to make ethanol, not methanol, if you have to make ethanol, then the process is more complex. And LanzaTech has a technology called microbial fermentation, where syngas can be reformed into ethanol by microbes. So that is one of the mechanisms which LanzaTech have. There have been other desktop studies at TR technology readiness level of 5 or 6 or 4 or 5 for making CO2 into ethanol. And that becomes a immediate use case because ethanol can go into blending of fuels, not methanol. Methanol has to have its own engines. It has to be a separate source of fuel. So many ships have been tried on methanol. But that pathway, I don't have the actual number of how much could be the projected demand for methanol from this, but this is very cost intensive in that way because you have to make hydrogen from any source, you have to capture CO2 and you have to make methanol. But even so, it has to be on the basis of you can't make methanol and do nothing with it. So what is the maximum demand for methanol? That has to drive this. And I'll have to get back to you. What is the methanol use case?
Fine. No, you can give us this data later.
Yeah,
once
I'll
you
give you this
get
data.
consolidated.
Yeah, I'll give you this data, all the use case data later. But multiple studies have been done globally and in India, and the use case, the U of CCUS cannot take the CO2 reduction from the atmosphere by more than 10 to 15%. That study has been done multiple times. But I'll give you the breakup, etc. here.
Sure. You can give that later. So we are approaching the time when we have to make time for question answers. But before that, very quickly, if you can tell us a couple of things. One, about the different technologies of CCUS, and are these technologies bespoke technologies, or are they amenable to be standardized? Is a standardization possible? And more important, it's a very important thing that I've reserved it for the last, the cost of the whole thing, because I read somewhere in IE or something, in some place, they say cost of CCUS is something like $120, $125 per ton of carbon. If that is so, then why do you do CCS? You simply do whatever you want, and then you can buy and purchase carbon credits elsewhere, no? Straight away.
So that let me come back to you. So first is
technology and costs, sir. If you can discuss these two briefly, then we'll do two questions.
Yeah. So technology, there are multiple. So the main technology, which is the differentiator in CCS value chain, is the carbon capture technologies, because rest of it is very standard. Pipeline is standard, compressions are standard, injection wells are standard, and the reservoir simulations are standard. Now, the carbon capture, there are two technologies, pre and post combustion. Pre-combustion is from, now it is not, some people interpret pre-combustion as before it is combusted, but that's not right. Pre-combustion is basically from syngas or natural gas, etc. So gasification. So that's a pre-combustion. So if the pressures are very high, if the partial pressure of CO2 is very high in the gas stream, then the cost of capture is low. So there are many technologies which are based on absorption, adsorption, and membranes. Quite a few technologies are there. Most of it uses amines, some kind of a solvent. Solrex is one solvent, and each of these companies patent their absorbent technology. So Shell has Adip Ultra and Cansolv. Carbon Clean has its own technology. Aker has their technology. Sasol have their technology. So all of these are carbon capture technologies. Now HPCL's rotating packed bed reactor, it is becoming its own technology. The cost of these could vary depending for a stream, let's say, if you just took one flue gas stream, cost would vary from $35 per ton to $80 per ton, the cost of capture. Now, that is mostly in the Western world, where the cost of steel is high, the cost of labor is high, and the cost of engineering is high. Engineering is $100, $120 per engineering hours. In India, it is $30 to $50, $30 to $40, $40 to $50 per engineering hours. Steel indices are 20 to 30% higher globally compared to China. We are 10% higher, so steel is low. Cost of labor is 1/15th, 1/20th of the other. It is 1/3 of China at $4 to $6 per man day per man hour, compared to $40 per man hour in Europe. So all of this ingredients will bring it down. Now, the typical cost of carbon capture is only 20 to 30% in the OPEX, in the CAPEX. Rest is in operating, in the OPEX. Around 70% of the cost of carbon capture is in OPEX. So the steam, the energy requirement, and all of it, the man-machine interfaces. So all these technologies.
Sorry to say that again. 30% is OPEX, is it?
No, 30% is CAPEX,
It's
meaning the
CAPEX.
cost
Okay.
of building the kit. The rest
Okay.
is OPEX per ton.
Rest is OPEX. So what
Yeah.
the cost you say for the equipment for CAPEX cost will be something like $35 to $85 per ton.
No, total cost of capture per ton. I said total cost of capture, including CAPEX plus OPEX, is in the range of 30 to 80, 35 to the $80 per ton. But if it's a very rich CO2 stream like the carbon and the coal gasification, it could be $15 per ton, $15 to $18 per ton. So depending
So
upon,
in India, what would be the typical cost? I mean, these are Western costs, as you said. In India, it will be, say, 30% cheaper?
Yeah, at least 30% cheaper. In India, we could, so I am aware of Middle East, the cost of capture in Middle East is around $45 per ton. So in India, we could get to a range of $35 per ton of cost of capture. Now, there are quite a few things go into there, your material selection, of course, the stream, the partial pressure of CO2, but then the CAPEX has to do also with model. Here is where standardization comes. So each of these technologies will have a standard kit. Yeah. So if there is a reuse case for a company, then of course it can be standardized. Then you can have same kit installed on other locations and those kind of things. But if the technology provider is different, Carbon Clean or Shell or Aker or others, then that standardization may not be there. But what you can do is modularization, meaning rather than stick building at the site and taking shutdowns, you could do a complete modularization study. What is the minimum amount of welding I have to do at the site? And then material selection. Do I need this exotic metallurgy here, or can I take credit for corrosion inhibition by injecting some CO2 corrosion inhibitors and reduce the cost of material? So you have to really do a lot of component level scoping to understand where you can reduce cost of this. Pipelines is standard. Now, pipelines also, we weld pipelines, but in Russia, their technology, in Australia, I've been in, there are in Surat, CO2, in Surat, the coal seam gas is sent to the LNG terminals hundreds of kilometers away, and the pipeline is just fused together through some techniques. So you don't have to do welding, etc. on the pipelines. So you have to use technology to reduce the cost, modularization to reduce the cost, material selection, optimal material selection to reduce the cost, and then in the OPEX phase, energy optimization. So recovery of energy from exhausts, so waste heat recovery and those kind of steam use optimization, etc. All of that you have to use. Some people they're also going for reworking the solvents, etc., where you have a higher efficiency of absorptions. So from FOAK, first of its kind, to NOAK, nth of its kind, there is always a 30% or to 40% reduction. So if IEFA were to be writing about solar in 2010, they said solar is a waste,
Yeah.
isn't it? You can't go there.
13
Now
rupees,
we have
14
a
rupees.
70%, 80% reduction in the chips cost, solar modules.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying, therefore, is you don't have an option, number one. And number two, yes, the cost is there, but there are other projects, and there have been train wrecks on some of these projects, but there are other projects also which have been train wrecked. The third thing which IEEE say about the risk of leakage, not one project, CCS project today has reported a leak to the aquifer, Sweetwater aquifer, or to the surface. So
Okay.
that is about risk management. It is not about a generalization that there is a risk. Yes, there is a risk in crossing the road also. So we have to figure
Okay.
out how to manage it. So that was the element around the technologies. So there are different technologies. Pipeline is the same. Injection compressors are the same. They can all be standardized. Absolutely no issues. Injection wells, depending upon where, what is the depth, etc., that will depend upon, that's a bespoke design. Sometimes you reuse an existing well and convert it into an existing well. In that injection well, for that, you need to understand the integrity of the tubulars, which are the iron which is in the wells. It shouldn't leak and those kind of things. Reservoirs are very specific. So you have to do a complete specific study for the reservoirs, how it will capture. So there has to be this saturation should be such that it can take the CO2. So you will have a trap. So that is the trapping mechanism, or it will dissolve, or it will mineralize. So there are different, or there will be residual saturation, which will be such that it will not go out of the pore space, so it will stay there. So there are different 4 mechanisms for capture of CO2 to stay in the ground. But with the cap rock has to be rock solid so that nothing could leak. It should not be injected at a pressure where the fracture of the cap rock happens and everything goes up and those kind of things. But that is the risk management.
Okay.
The cost I told you already.
All right.
And the transportation cost could be $3 to $10 per ton of CO2, and the injection cost could be $3 to $15. So in India, we can land a CCS project for a $60 to $70 per ton if we do the right things, because our costs are much lower. Yeah.
And I suppose the CCUS project will be in a position to earn carbon credits.
Right. Carbon credits in India. So in Europe, at the peak, the the ETS and the exchange traded schemes, CO2 had peaked at 205 euros per ton. Now it is in the range of $50 to $60 per ton. In India, we are looking at the projection that I was reading is around $15. So there is a voluntary market and there is a compliance market. So in the voluntary market, it is much lower. In the compliance market in India, the projections are around $15 to $20 per ton in the next few years by 2030.
So you will have to net it off. No, you say $60 to $70 minus this $15 that you will get anyway from carbon credits.
You'll get plus the subsidies from the government. Now, if the pipeline is laid, your pipeline cost goes away. Then here's a capture cost. And if the government has made a CCS, like Port of Rotterdam is making modularized compression station. So if more CO2 comes in the pipeline, it will just go and inject. And if you have multiple locations for injection, then the cost could come down.
We have given no time for questions, but I suppose we can
sorry.
extend this, Preeti, by about 5 minutes or so. Are there questions, Pritesh?
Sorry about it, but I think
I don't see any questions in the chat box, but if somebody wants to speak up.
Yes, I think Preeti ma'am has a question.
Yeah, please.
Go ahead. Yeah, Preeti, you want me to read it out?
Question.
Yeah. While renewables are covered, what is the question?
Yeah, why is CCUS largely ignored in India, where renewables are being covered so closely by the media? Why is CCUS generally ignored?
So there was this, first is the awareness. So it has come very late to us. Only after CBAM, that is the cross-border adjustment mechanisms, where dangles hanging our head that our steel imports will become uncompetitive, and the CORSIA, etc., which is for civil aviation, CO2 capture as becoming essential. So one is, I would say, the lack of the urgency because of the awareness. And the second thing is the boogie of technology. Oh, it is too difficult, very highly technical, and we will not be. It will take a long time to actually make it happen. But now it has come right in our face. We are seeing, because just the climate disruptions were not enough for us to go into the CCS route. But then when you saw the entire world moving and cross-border adjustment mechanism in Europe is coming, that if your steel is not green, then you'll be taxed. Our aluminum exports to Europe has reduced because of CBA, cross-border adjustment mechanisms, etc., and some other penalties. We have started thinking about it. So it is a lack. I would say we are not in sync with the global thinking on this one, but people have made visits. So the minister has gone to Northern Lights with his delegation to Norway. People have been traveling to various locations, and they have seen that this is not such a difficult thing to do. And they also realize that we have no other option for meeting our net zero targets by 2070.
So I look at it this way. In India, as you just mentioned yourself, we cannot wish away coal. Coal is our energy mainstay, and there are plans to put up something like 85 gigawatts of coal projects right up to 2030, or perhaps a few years beyond that. So we have to put up coal projects. We have no other option. But when we do that, the only way you can neutralize the carbon emissions is to do CCUS.
Yeah, you have to make your carbon green, coal green. So basically, you have to.
This is the only way to do it. I would like to know, maybe another time, if you have time, you can tell me. Maybe we'll do the calculations. So if in a typical, let us say, 800 megawatts supercritical coal power plant, if you put CCS, what will be the penalty on the tariff? If it is a 6 rupee tariff, how much will it increase by 650, 1 rupee? I mean, it should be interesting to have this calculations.
Yeah.
Perhaps you can provide it later.
Yeah, I'll give you. Those maths have been worked out, and for all sectors, for refineries, petrochemicals, and all of this. Just for cement, I don't know if you have time, but 30 seconds I'll tell you. So cement, we produce roughly 4,000 to 5,000, 400 to 500 million tons of cement every year, and the capacity is 600, and we can go up to 800 million tons every year. Per ton of CO2, coal is 0.5 to 0.8 tons of CO2. So 200 million tons of CO2 is from cement, sorry, not coal. From cement, roughly 200 to 250 million tons of CO2 is emitted. If I put $100, 100 rupees per ton of cement, which is roughly 3,000 to 4,000 rupees per ton of cement, if you just put 100 rupees cess or on a cement per ton, and it will be in the wash, people will not, I mean, of course, there will be a cost, but it will be in the builder's margins. That 100 rupees per ton will generate roughly, if you're saying 440, you're roughly $500 million for you. $500 million. And look at this large projects that have been built. They are all in the range of $500 million to $1.2, $1.3 billion. You can easily put a Western hub or an Eastern hub and do it for 2 or 3 years. You have sufficient money to make these infrastructure available for people then to, because if you have something in which you can deliver your CO2, it becomes easy. But as a point emitter, I can't be, okay, I have to lay 200 kilometers of pipeline and then I have to do an injection well and then all of this. I am an injector and happy to take that hit, but what do I do with that CO2? So if it is just captured for me and in putting it into the pipeline, it is much easier for me. And this is what is happening in Europe. Europe says, okay, mate, you have to buy carbon credits at $80 per ton, or you have to inject, and the total cost of that might come to around 60 or whatever be that number. So choice is yours. So carbon credit. So in India, right now our projections are low, but as the CCTS has already come up, four sectors are covered under chloroalkali, pulp and paper, cement, and aluminum as well.
They've added 4 more.
They have added 4 more now.
Yeah.
So slowly this will catch up. The cost is not prohibitive with a very minor input costs, etc. for each of these sectors. We can make infrastructure for CCS in India, and then you are in the game.
So in conclusion, you would say that CCUS is an idea whose time has come.
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
any other questions, Pratish?
I think
I don't know.
Amruta has a question. Amruta,
Amruta,
can
go
you
ahead,
please go
please.
ahead?
Hi,
Speak.
hello, Mr. Mishra. Thank you for this talk. It's so informative. What I wanted to ask is there's this conversation about coal being a major, playing a major role in this aspect, as you were explaining, plus, economically how it makes sense because India has such a huge amount of coal. Now, one thing that I was curious about is my understanding is that the more coal that we start using, it is going to lead to deforestation. And so
Deforestation.
one deforestation, as is if you're doing coal mining, we'll need to extract the natural resources, which is usually leading to deforestation. So what I was curious about is this aspect where, like in nature, the best carbon sequestering is from the trees, from plants. So when we cut off trees, there's that loss that is happening, which we have to compensate again with all the carbon capture technology. Plus, with trees gone, there's also the amount of oxygen that goes into the environment that is gone. So how is that added into this entire conversation?
Yeah, so no, very valid point. So there are multiple. So first is coal mining does do deforestation, etc. But look at this. Each tree at its when it is grown to its capacity can sequester only 20 kg of CO2 per year. So if you were to deal with if you wanted to get to net zero through forestation route, you will have to forest the entire landmass of India, the entire landmass of Canada, and still you will not be able to get to the amount of CO2 that will need to be pulled back from the atmosphere to be sequestered in the ground through the routes. One very important thing to say is the mangroves or so sea absorbs 30 to 40% of the CO2 that is coming out that humans emit. So sea is the biggest sink, and mangroves have 3 to 4 times more capacity for absorption of CO2 than the trees, regular vegetation. So I don't know if there is a link between people have made that link that if you do more mining, there will be more trees cut and therefore there would be higher CO2 load in the atmosphere. To an extent, it would be there, but that would be minimal. What will be important is the biggest 95% of the chunk is the emissions from CO2 thermal power plants, which generate. Of course, there will be some secondary emissions, scope 2 emissions when you're coal mining, because you'll be using equipment which are run on diesel that will also give out CO2, that is scope 2 emissions. But the main or you take power from the grid, which is thermal, that is scope 2 or scope. So the diesel could be scope 3. The main thing is the emission of CO2 into the atmosphere from the thermal power plants. And if we can figure out a way to capture that, that is one pathway. The other pathway, which was just talking about, is coal gasification has to be taken dead seriously. If we can gasify and get to syngas and from there to methanol or hydrogen or any other component, or just as a fuel, you suddenly have decarbonized coal, and with the CCS, of course. And the CO2 stream coming out, coal gasification is very clean, very rich, and its cost is less than 10 to 15 or $15 to $20 per ton. So suddenly you have a huge anchor for CCS projects. So that is a one pathway that the government has to evaluate deeply. But yes, cutting the trees, felling trees for mining has an impact, but the biggest impact is the CO2 from thermal power plants, which will burn the coal. Does it make sense for you?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other question? Now is the time to ask a question if you have one. Or you can also send us the questions and I will request Mr. Mishra to answer them for you later.
Yeah.
On this coal gasification, Mishra ji, our Talcher project has been hanging fire for decades now.
Yeah, no, I think the CIL has started a company now when they are working on this. But there are many commercial plants running in China running in South Africa and other places where this is happening, and we have to lap it up. As I said, there are challenges. Our coal has high ash. It is less washable, calorific value is low. But then what it will do is our cost of the projects will be higher. But we can still manage
Absorb it.
this with CCS. Yes, yes. And I was talking to GTI, Gas Technology Institute, which has a technology called UGAS technology. They have dealt with 40% ash content. Ours is around 30 to 35%. So this is a technology issue which can be managed. And so this is something that the government will have to really push, or we should all really push.
So the 20,000 crores of allocation is a good idea now. It is very timely.
Yeah, it is. It's a very good idea. And thanks to silent warriors who have been talking about CCS for a while, that the government took note and they're doing something about it.
So we've overshot our time by 11 minutes. Pritesh, Preeti, my apologies. The subject is very interesting. I don't think we have covered half of it. So we might need even another session to go through this. But anyway, final call for any one question that we can take now. Not, then I'll thank Mr. Mishra and close this. No?
I think we can request them to write to our climate change.
Yes. So if you can think of a question now, or if you can think of a question later, please do write to us. I will request Mr. Varorishi Mishra, as the name should be pronounced, Varorishi Mishra, to write to us, to reply.
Var has been taken from Varenyam, which means the best service station. Ruchi is interest. So Varuchi therefore means service. The person who's interested in the best.
Varenyam. Tatsabitur Varenyam.
Yeah, Varenyam. That's right, sir.
Varoruchi. Yes. That's the beauty of Bengali. Arnab is Arnav, which means ocean.
Yeah. But I'm not a Bengali. Yeah, everything is an O. That's why O aaya. Varuchi becomes Vororuchi. So, but Roshogulla. So
thank you very much. Bhalu Achi session. Thank you.
Yeah, but I'm not a Bengali, as I said, but I can speak fluent Bangla. That's right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ramesh and Mr. Mishra, for that very informative session. Just a heads up to our participants that our next online session as part of the climate change conversations will happen on February 16th, which is next Monday at around the same time. The session is on heat, covering heat and what gets missed. And this will be anchored by Shreya Raman, who's a resident at the Climate Change Media Hub at the ACJ. So we request you all to join that session as well. And thank you for today. Thank you to both the speakers and all the participants. Have a good day.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye for now.